With the majority of our project now in place, we're left with making only a few adjustments to our steam particles to get this baby into the can. Let's make those needed procedures using the Project pflow07 file that was saved up at the end of the last video. Now, there's two things in particular that we're going to need to do. One will be to get our facing particles moving around just a bit using a wind space warp. And two, we're going to need some kind of mechanism to make our steam disappear. For that, we'll be using a delete operator. Let's see what we can do. Starting with the wind space warp, let's change the top view to a back view. We can now grab a wind over on the right and place it into that new window. Now, like we did with the deflector in a previous video, we're going to want to also align our wind space warp to the hot plate. So with that selected, let's go ahead and click on the Align command on the right-hand side of the toolbar. Once we've done that, using any of the views, you can now click on the yellow hot plate. Okay, from the dialog, we'll make sure X, Y, and Z are checked, and current and target object are set to center. Once you've verified that, we can go ahead and apply or click OK. Merely for visual purposes, I'll now move the wind closer down toward the hot plate itself. Okay, for the wind settings, we'll do this. We'll leave strength set to 0, and we'll change the turbulence to 0.15. We're just trying to mix in a little added movement for our steam, which we can get by simply adjusting the turbulence. We really don't want the wind to push anything down, so that's the reason we left the strength at 0. Okay, now to get the wind into play, we're going to have to go back in our particle view and add a force operator to our steam event. In the depot, locate the force, then drag it directly above the material dynamic in the steam event. Now remember, you're going to want that line to be blue when you let go of the mouse. We can now select that force operator, then head to the upper right-hand corner. Under the Space Warps box, let's click on Add, and we can then select Wind from the list. So notice that with the pflow, it's not a bind to space warp thing. That only works for Max's non-event driven particle systems. For the wind settings, we'll change the strength to 0 and we'll take the turbulence to 0.15. Now we're doing this just to provide a little extra movement into our steam particles. That's what adjusting the turbulence did. We really don't want the wind to push anything down, so that's the reason the strength was set to 0. Okay, now to get the wind into play, we're going to need to add a force operator to our steam event. You see, when using particle flow, there's no bind to space warp command. That's only when you're using one of Max's non-event driven particle systems. For this one, everything revolves around adding operators and tests. For pflow, that wind is added in by way of an operator. Let's reselect the pflow icon, then re-enter particle view. Okay, down on the depot, locate the force operator. Now once you've found that, drag the force into the steam event, positioning it above material dynamic. Now remember, when the line shows up, you're going to want to make sure that that's blue. Let's now minimize particle view and scrub the timeline so we can see the effect the force has had on our particles. So the turbulence merely spreads the spawning particles out just a tad more. Okay, now to get the particles to actually die off, we're going to throw a delete operator into the mix. This time, down in our parts store, the depot, locate the delete operator and drag it directly below material dynamic. You can drop that in place as soon as you see the blue line. Now over on the right, in the remove category, we'll set this to by particle age. Then for the lifespan or die-off time for each steam particle, we'll set that to 40 frames. So now, 40 frames after creating the puff of steam, each particle will fade away. Now that pretty much should do it. Let's render a couple of different points in time and see how things are looking. I'll go to frame 22. Now at this point, you'll see the drop clearly in view. Again, a little bit on the big side, but that simply gives us a better look at what we're working with. Let's also render frame 45. Now here, the water drop's contact with the deflector has taken place, thereby generating the visible steam. Let's now move to frame 90 and see how things looked once rendered there. There we go, our first falling water drop, the one that was toward the front of our hot plate, has made contact, turned into steam, and then faded away. Now once this baby's been rendered out, the final product will look like this. So there's a little particle flow for you. Driven by the events that we set up, you can see just how powerful a system it truly is.